He buried the dog tag under a quiet oak tree and saluted the memory of his best friend, thinking he'd never see him again. But 5 years later, during a military ceremony, someone walked in on 4 legs, wearing a familiar vest, and everything the soldier believed was about to be turned upside down. There are moments in life that shake you to your core. For Staff Sergeant Mark Reeves, that moment came not in the battlefield, but long after he came home. Mark had already lost sleep, blood, and brothers in war, but nothing hit him like losing his K9 partner, Max, a German shepherd trained to detect explosives and protect Mark with his life. Max wasn't just a working dog, he was family. For years, Mark believed Max was gone. He mourned him, he honored him, he carried that pain like a weight he'd never shake off. But the truth was something no one had dared to tell him, until that one day, when a miracle walked back into his life. Mark Reeves was just a kid when he signed those papers. 19, too young to drink back home, but old enough to be handed a rifle and flown across the world. He didn't come from a military family, no long legacy of medals and uniforms, but something in him was restless. He didn't want to waste his life in a dead-end town where every day looked like the last. He wanted meaning, purpose, and he believed the uniform would give him that. Mark wasn't loud, wasn't the tough guy who picked fights. He didn't need attention. He just wanted to serve, to protect something bigger than himself, to do a job that mattered. So when the assignment came through, deployment to one of the most dangerous regions in the world, he didn't flinch. He packed his gear, hugged his mom, and boarded the plane. The base was a concrete compound surrounded by dirt, wind, and tension. Days were long, nights were unpredictable, and in between, there was always the waiting, the silence before something exploded. Mark adjusted. He learned fast. He followed orders. But there was something different about this kind of war. It wasn't just bullets flying across an open battlefield. No, this was slow, creeping, the kind of danger that didn't shout, but whispered. You learned to read shadows, to question a trash bag on the side of the road, to notice when the birds stopped chirping. Every footstep could be the last. And that's when Max came into his life. Max wasn't just a dog. He was a soldier, AK-9 trained for detection, protection, and survival. A sleek German shepherd with eyes that saw everything before anyone else did. The first time Mark saw him, Max was pacing outside the supply tent, his handler standing nearby. Max wasn't wagging his tail. He didn't come up to sniff. He just looked at Mark, head slightly tilted, like he was sizing him up. He doesn't play well with others, someone said. Mark shrugged. Neither do I. It started off like that, distance, mutual respect, but no real connection, until one mission changed that. They'd been sweeping a dirt road, leading out of a small village. Intel said it was safe, but experience had taught Mark that safe didn't mean anything out here. Max was out ahead, sniffing, ears twitching, his body tense like a coiled spring. He found a buried pressure plate, one that would have taken out the entire convoy. Because of Max, nobody got hurt that day. After that, things changed. Max started waiting for Mark outside the mess hall, sat beside him during gear checks, slept close by in the barracks, always between Mark and the door. And Mark started talking to him about home, about the weird dreams he had, about how some days it felt like everything they did just got undone the next day. Max never responded, obviously, but he listened, or at least, he made it feel that way. There was a calm in Max that Mark didn't see in anyone else. Other guys shook, broke down, snapped. But Max stayed steady. Even on the worst nights, when mortars screamed overhead and the sky turned orange, Max would sit close, breathing slow, eyes locked on Mark like he was saying, "We're not done yet, keep going." They became inseparable. Mark would rather go out without his helmet than without Max, because Max was his armor. But war doesn't care about bonds. It was supposed to be a routine sweep, standard patrol, a checkpoint near a known route for smugglers and potential insurgents. Nothing too deep, nothing they hadn't done 100 times before. Mark geared up. Max was already pacing near the vehicle, vest strapped, leash in hand. They moved like clockwork. The village was eerily quiet that day. No kids playing in the dust, no merchants shouting, just dry air and stillness, the kind that makes your skin crawl. Max was out front as usual, his body stiff, alert, head low. Mark followed, eyes flicking between rooftops and alleyways. Halfway down the road, Max stopped. He sniffed, circled, pawed at the ground near an old tire. Mark signaled halt. Max dug a little, then sat. A clear signal. Something was buried. The team neutralized the IED safely. Everyone breathed a little easier. They joked that Max had just saved their butts again. They didn't know there was a second device, a smarter one. It was hidden in the debris just 10 feet away, outside the blast radius of where Max had signaled, and it was triggered not by pressure, but by motion. Someone had eyes on them. The second Mark stepped forward, the world exploded. Dust, fire, a sound so loud it erased everything. Mark felt himself lifted, then slammed into something hard. His ears rang, his vision blurred, time slowed, or maybe stopped. His mouth moved, but he couldn't hear himself. He looked for Max, his instinct, his only thought. But Max was gone. There was blood, smoke, screaming, then darkness. When Mark woke up in the med tent, they told him the basics. He'd been lucky. Minor shrapnel wounds, a concussion, temporary hearing loss, and Max didn't survive the blast. They said they found parts of his vest near the crater. Nothing else. Mark didn't believe it. Couldn't. Not Max. Not as Max. He asked to see the body. They said it wasn't recoverable. He demanded photos. Anything. They said the evidence was inconclusive, but based on where Max had been during the blast, there was no realistic way he could have survived. Mark didn't sleep that night, or the night after, or the next week. He kept going over it in his head. What if Max had sensed something and Mark had misread it? What if there had been a sign he missed? He blamed himself. Completely. He should have trusted Max's body language. Should have held him back. Should have done something. Grief in the field is a strange thing. You don't get to break down. You don't get time. You get patched up, rearmed, and sent back out. But Mark was never the same. He moved slower, spoke less. The fire in him dimmed. Max's leash hung on the side of his bunk, like a ghost that never left. When his deployment ended, Mark came home, physically anyway. He walked through airports and welcome home signs, smiled for his mom, shook hands with officers. But inside, something was missing. A piece of him never left that dirt road. He didn't talk about Max, not to his family. Not to the VA therapist, not even to the guys from his unit. Because how do you explain that the only thing keeping you alive wasn't a person, but a dog? A few years passed. Mark had a job at a local security firm. Routine stuff. Nothing like the chaos he came from, but it kept him moving. He still had nightmares. Still woke up calling Max's name some nights. Still avoided certain smells, like diesel fuel and burned metal. One day, he got an invitation. A military appreciation event. Large scale. Honoring K-9 units, both active and retired. Ceremonies, medals, reunions, all that. Mark almost threw it out, but something stopped him. Maybe guilt, maybe hope, maybe he just missed seeing dogs in uniform. He decided to go. What he didn't know was that everything he believed about that day in the desert, everything that haunted him, was about to be shattered. Because Max wasn't gone, at least, not in the way they told him. The medic's words felt like a sledgehammer. Max didn't make it. That sentence echoed louder than the explosion itself, louder than the screams, the sirens, the chaos. Mark lay there in the cot, bandaged and bruised, staring at the tense canvas ceiling, but all he saw was Max's face. Alert, loyal, unshaken. He refused to believe it. It didn't feel real. Just a few hours earlier, Max was alive, by his side, sniffing the path like he always did. Mark kept replaying those last moments in his head, like a broken film reel. Was there something he missed? A signal Max gave? A hesitation in his step? Something, anything, that could explain why Max had to take the hit? But there was nothing. No warning. Just the sudden roar of fire and earth ripping apart. Then the quiet that followed, too quiet. The grief was instant and raw. But what made it worse was the guilt. The unbearable weight of what if? What if he'd gone first? What if he'd called Max back? What if he hadn't taken that mission at all? Mark had always known that military life came with risks. He'd accepted that. But he never imagined losing Max like this. Not without a goodbye. Not without holding him one last time. Not without even seeing his body. That's what disturbed him most. They said Max was gone. They told him the blast was too strong, that there was nothing left to recover, that it was better not to look. But Mark needed to look. He needed proof, closure, something. But the army moved on quickly. There were reports to file, more missions to complete, and too many other injured soldiers to treat. Max's name was marked Kia. Killed in action. A small ceremony was held. Mark was given a paw print cast in clay and a folded flag. That was it. The world moved on. But Mark didn't. Back home, things were off. He couldn't sleep right. Couldn't eat without guilt gnawing at him. He tried therapy. They said he had survivor's guilt, maybe PTSD, that what he went through was common among soldiers who lost K-9 partners. But it didn't feel common. It felt personal, because Max wasn't just a tool. He wasn't a vehicle or a weapon. He was someone. Mark would sit alone at night sometimes, in the corner of his living room and whisper Max's name, hoping, in some twisted way, that maybe this was a bad dream and Max would come trotting in, tongue out, eyes sharp like always. But all he got was silence. His house was filled with reminders of Max, the leash still hanging by the door, the old harness tucked away in a drawer, the chew toy Max had once refused to let go of during training, still with teeth marks. Some nights, Mark would wake up swearing he heard barking. Other nights, he'd dream of the explosion. Only in his dreams, he saw Max running back toward him through the smoke, alive, unburnt, eyes shining. Every time, just before Max reached him, Mark would wake up, and every time, his heart would break all over again. What hurt even more was how people didn't understand. They said things like, "He was just a dog," or "At least you made it out. Just a dog." That sentence made Mark see red. They didn't see how Max used to nudge his hand gently when he was spiraling, or how he'd sit at the foot of the cot during deployment nights, eyes always scanning the shadows. How Max once pulled him out of the way of a tripwire Mark hadn't seen in time. No, Max wasn't just a dog. Max was a soldier, a brother, and now he was gone. Months turned into a year. Mark started withdrawing from people. He kept a small circle. Even when friends tried to reach out, he kept his distance. It wasn't that he didn't appreciate them. It was just that they didn't get it. They didn't know what it was like to lose someone you couldn't even bury. And then came the letter. It was a formal-looking envelope from the Department of Defense. Mark opened it without much thought, expecting another survey or benefits update. But inside was an invitation, a military appreciation ceremony, special event for retired veterans and handlers, hosted at the base where Mark had trained with Max all those years ago. There would be tributes to fallen K-9s, a video presentation, and a recognition moment for distinguished service teams. Normally, Mark wouldn't have gone, but something tugged at him. Maybe it was the location. Maybe it was the chance to hear Max's name honored publicly. Or maybe, deep down, he was still chasing that closure he never really got. So he packed his suit, shaved for the first time in weeks, and booked the flight. The moment he stepped foot onto that base again, memories hit him like a freight train. The smell of motor oil, the echo of commands being shouted across the field, the bite training stations, the kennels. He stood frozen for a second. It was like stepping into a dream you forgot you had. The event was held inside a hangar-turned auditorium. Rows of chairs lined the space, a large screen set up on stage, and military flags flanking the podium. Mark took a seat toward the back. He watched as handlers, old and young, took the stage to share stories. Some funny, some heartbreaking, all of them filled with the same raw truth. The bond between a soldier and their K-9 is unlike anything else. Then came the tribute slideshow. Photos of fallen dogs filled the screen. Names, ranks, dates, one by one. When Max's picture came up, those piercing eyes staring straight ahead, Mark felt his throat tighten. The room applauded. A few people placed hands over their hearts. But for Mark, it wasn't enough. It still didn't feel real. Then the announcer's voice returned, calm and ceremonial. "Now, we have a special surprise for one of our honored guests." Mark didn't think much of it. He looked around, expecting a medal ceremony or a speech from someone important. But the announcer continued. This guest served overseas with a partner who was declared Kia during a mission, but due to misidentification in the field, that partner survived. Mark's heart stopped. Wait, what? The announcer's voice grew gentler, slower. There was confusion, chaos. The fog of war made it nearly impossible to confirm. The dog was injured badly, but recovered. He was transferred to a private rehabilitation unit under a classified operation, then reassigned. We only recently uncovered the full details. Mark's hands were shaking now. He didn't hear the rest of what was said. All he saw was the curtain behind the stage shifting. Movement. A handler in uniform walked out with a leash. Mark stood up, half in disbelief, half in desperation. And then, Max appeared. It was like time froze. There he was, older, a little grayer around the muzzle, a limp in his back leg. But it was him. Those eyes, that stance, that same steady, calm energy Mark knew like his own breath. The handler unclipped the leash. Max didn't hesitate. He ran, straight toward Mark. The sound of paws on concrete, the gasp from the crowd. The moment Max leapt up and placed both paws on Mark's chest like he had never left, Mark dropped to his knees. Tears poured down his face as he buried his face in Max's fur. He wasn't dreaming. Max was real, alive. The crowd stood and applauded. But for Mark, there was no one else in the room. It was just him and Max, back together. After all this time, after all the pain, the silence, the questions, He didn't need closure anymore. He had Max, and Max had come home. Mark thought nothing could ever top that moment, kneeling in the middle of the military hangar, arms wrapped around Max, tears soaking into the fur of the dog he had thought he'd lost forever. But what came next turned out to be just as shocking, just as emotional, and in some ways, even more complicated, because the truth was, Max had changed. It wasn't obvious at first. At the ceremony, Max was everything Mark remembered, loyal, alert, devoted. He responded to Mark's voice instantly, even after all those months, as if no time had passed between them. But behind those sharp, intelligent eyes, there was something different, a kind of haunted weight, as if Max, too, had lived through something that words couldn't describe. Mark didn't realize how deep those scars ran until they got back home. The first few nights were pure joy. Mark set up Max's old bed, washed but still worn around the edges, and let him roam the house freely. Max sniffed every room like he was collecting memories. He paused the longest at the door, where his leash used to hang. Then he looked back at Mark, and something in his gaze felt grateful, like Max understood the gravity of it all, like he knew he wasn't supposed to be here. The community exploded with emotion. The military had quietly released a press statement about the miraculous K-9 survival and reunion. Social media lit up with photos from the ceremony. Videos of the moment Max ran to Mark went viral. Everyone was talking about it. The dog that came back from the dead. Some called it fate. Others called it miracle. News stations showed up on Mark's front lawn for interviews. At first, Mark resisted. He didn't want attention. He just wanted time with Max. But eventually, he agreed to one interview. And as he spoke about the bond between Handler and K9, about grief, healing, and unexpected hope, he realized something. This story wasn't just about him and Max anymore. It was about every soldier who ever lost a partner, every person who grieved an animal like family, every moment people felt unseen in their sorrow. Max was a symbol of something bigger, but fame didn't change everything. It didn't erase the trauma. Max had nightmares. That's when Mark first saw it, the invisible wounds his partner had brought back with him. One night, Mark was woken by the sound of frantic scratching. He ran into the living room and found Max trembling behind the couch, ears pinned, eyes wide. He was panting heavily, growling under his breath as if surrounded by ghosts. Mark knelt slowly. "Max, buddy, it's me." It took a minute. Then Max blinked. His breathing slowed, and like a shadow lifting, the fear in his eyes faded. This happened again and again. Some nights, Max would bolt upright from his bed, ears alert, barking at shadows. Once, he accidentally knocked over a photo frame. It shattered, startling them both. Max cowered as though he expected punishment. That's when Mark understood. Max had seen things, lived through things, maybe even suffered in the rehab facility he'd been secretly transferred to. The military had been vague in their explanation. He was reassigned, they said, deemed too injured for combat deployment. Mark pressed for details. Where had Max been? Who took care of him? Why had no one told him sooner? The official response was silence. Classified, they said. That didn't sit right with Mark. Not after everything. He started digging. At first, it was just small questions. Emails, FOIA requests, calls to former unit members. But the more he looked, the stranger things got. Records were redacted. Some entries had conflicting dates. The rehab center Max had supposedly been sent to no longer existed, or rather, it never officially had. Then one day, Mark got an anonymous email. No subject, no sender name, just one sentence. "You don't know what Max protected you from." That single line chilled him. He stared at it for a long time. What did it mean? Was this a warning? A threat? He looked at Max, curled peacefully in the corner. Just a dog, but also not just a dog. Mark clicked reply. Typed, "Who are you? What do you mean?" No answer. He tried to let it go, but he couldn't. The email raised more questions than it answered. What had really happened after the blast? He revisited the incident report. The explosion had come from a pressure-triggered device planted beneath rubble. Max had leapt forward right before it went off, according to the report, to investigate a scent change. But something didn't add up. The area had already been cleared. Why would Max break protocol? Unless he smelled something else. Mark ran the report through software that reconstructs field data using geo-coordinates and environmental conditions. What he found shocked him. A heat signature had been detected shortly before the blast, but not a human one. Something synthetic, almost like a triggering device. And the signature was moving. Could Max have sensed a second person? A remote detonator? Someone watching? Mark remembered the final look in Max's eyes before the blast. The way he turned, locked eyes, and then bolted forward. He wasn't just sniffing. He was protecting. from something or someone. Now Mark couldn't let it go. He dove deeper. Military friends warned him to back off. "You're poking the wrong hornet's nest," one told him. Sometimes things are buried for a reason. But Mark didn't care. He owed Max the truth. Then strange things started happening. One night, his mailbox was ripped open. Just junk mail stolen. Nothing of value. Another time, he came home to find muddy boot prints on his back porch. No signs of forced entry, but the door handle had smudge marks, as if someone had tried. He reported it. Police said there wasn't enough evidence to investigate. Mark didn't believe them. He started checking his car for tracking devices, switched phones, used encrypted email. Friends thought he was being paranoid, but Max knew. Whenever someone passed by their house, especially certain cars, Max's demeanor would change. Ears up, tail stiff, a deep, low growl in his throat. It wasn't just instinct, it was memory. Max had seen something, and someone didn't want him to remember. Mark made a decision. He contacted an investigative journalist, someone who had done exposés on military cover-ups before. A woman named Alia Cruz. Brave, sharp, relentless. He told her everything. At first, she was skeptical, but after seeing the reports, the email, and a strange recording Max's microchip had been embedded with, a hidden audio file no one had noticed before, she agreed. Something was off. The audio was garbled, filled with static, but one sentence came through. The dog wasn't supposed to survive. That was it. Alia started digging. What she found made Mark's stomach turn. Max had been part of an experimental division, a test group for dogs trained not just in detection, but in autonomous threat assessment, AI-assisted canine tech, behavioral implants. None of it public. Max had been monitored, tracked, studied. The day of the explosion, Max had not only detected the device, he'd changed course against orders. The system inside him flagged an irregularity, a set not in the enemy database. That's why he ran forward. The system had flagged it as unknown friendly. Translation: someone they weren't supposed to be fighting. Mark now understood. Max hadn't just saved his life. He'd stopped a friendly fire setup, and someone wanted it buried. Alia's article exploded online. The military denied the claims, called them conspiracy theories. But more handlers came forward. Other dogs had gone missing. Some had died, without bodies returned. Some had reassigned tags with no records. Max wasn't alone. Suddenly, the spotlight was back. Mark and Max were thrust into public discourse again, but this time, with controversy. Supporters called them heroes, whistleblowers, truth-tellers. Others called them traitors. Mark didn't care. He had Max, and Max had finally told a story. They started visiting veteran centers together. Max helped soldiers open up, even ones who hadn't spoken in years. Something about his presence, his quiet understanding, unlocked something in them. He wasn't just a hero. He was a healer now. Mark could finally sleep again. The nightmares faded. Max's too. Some wounds never fully healed. But together, they were whole. And they had a new mission now, to make sure no soldier, human or canine, was ever forgotten again. Sometimes it takes a voice without words to speak the loudest truth. Mark never wanted to be a hero, and Max, he had already been one, over and over again, without the medals or the headlines. All Mark wanted now was to let the world see Max, not just as a soldier or a survivor, but as a living testament to a truth that had been buried, lied about, and almost forgotten. But telling the truth was never going to be safe. After the investigation by journalist Alia Cruz went public, things got dangerous. Alia's expose triggered a flood of responses from retired military officials, canine handlers, and anonymous sources. A former handler shared a chilling story about a dog named Ranger who'd vanished after an unsanctioned operation in the same region Max had been deployed. Another source sent encrypted files, hinting at a top-secret program known as Directive Echo, a covert experiment blending artificial intelligence with battlefield instinct, using K9S as the test subjects. Max had been part of that program, and when Max made a decision, his own decision, to intervene during what appeared to be a friendly fire setup, he had done the one thing the program wasn't designed for. He disobeyed. He disobeyed because he loved Mark, and that love saved a man's life. But it also marked Max for elimination. Mark was done staying quiet. He and Alia set up a lie for him, an event in Washington, D.C., titled Silent Service, the unheard voices of canine warriors. It was supposed to be small, an awareness panel, a tribute, but within weeks, it snowballed into something much bigger. Veterans signed up to speak. News stations committed live coverage. Even a few politicians reached out quietly, asking for the files. Most said they couldn't help officially, but they'd be watching. When Mark stood backstage the night of the event, he was shaking. Max was right beside him, wearing his harness. The scar on his leg, where shrapnel had once pierced through, was healed, but still visible. His eyes were steady, calm. The auditorium was packed. The stage was lit. Mark had spoken publicly before, but this felt different. This wasn't just a story. This was truth against power. A single moment where silence wasn't an option anymore. And as he stepped out to the podium, Max walked with him. The applause was loud, but when it died down, the silence was heavy. Mark began slowly. I want to tell you about a soldier who never carried a gun, but saved more lives than I can count. A soldier who was declared dead, buried in paperwork, forgotten by the very system he served, but who came home, not just to me, but to all of us. He looked at Max. He didn't just bring back my life. He brought back the truth. For the next 45 minutes, Mark laid it all bare. He talked about Max's loyalty, the day of the explosion, the lies, the missing records, the anonymous threats, the secret recordings. He played the garbled audio clip for the crowd, and when he shared the line, "The dog wasn't supposed to survive," the entire room fell into stunned silence. Some cried, some stood, some clenched their fists. And then, Mark did something no one expected. He stepped away from the mic and knelt beside Max. "I could stand here all day telling you what this dog did, but I think it's time you see what loyalty looks like." He looked toward the side curtain and nodded. A young man stepped out, nervous, shuffling forward. His name was Eli. He was a Marine who had been medically discharged after losing both legs in an IED blast. Since returning home, he hadn't spoken a word in over a year. Nothing could reach him, not therapy, not medication, until Mark explained that 2 weeks earlier, he and Max had visited a veterans hospital. Max had walked right up to Eli, past dozens of other patients, and sat in front of him. Didn't move, didn't bark, just sat there and looked into the young man's eyes. Minutes passed. Then something unbelievable happened. Eli started crying, and then he whispered, "I remember." Those were his first words in 13 months. And now here he was. Eli looked at Max again on stage, and then, gripping the microphone with trembling hands, he spoke to the audience. "I don't know what they did to this dog. I don't know what he saw, but I know this. When I looked in his eyes, I didn't see an experiment. I saw a brother." The room erupted, tears, clapping, some standing, fists over their hearts. Mark knew this was the moment. He reached into his jacket and pulled out something wrapped in velvet. It was Max's military medal. He had never put it on him. Not officially. Not after what happened. It had been too painful, too complicated. But tonight the world finally knew. He knelt beside Max, opened the box, and gently fastened the medal around his neck. "This is for every order you followed, every life you saved, and every truth you protected, even when they tried to silence you." And as he clipped it into place, Max sat up straighter, proud, almost regal. The medal gleamed under the lights. The moment went viral. Photos of Max wearing that medal swept across the world. Hashtags like #MaxTheTruth, #K9Hero, and #UncoverEcho trended globally. People were finally asking the right questions, demanding answers. Within days, the pressure mounted. A special investigative committee was formed to probe the allegations. Congressional hearings began, and for the first time in history, AK-9 Max was officially recognized as a key witness in a federal case. Of course, he couldn't testify with words, but his presence said everything. Mark and Max were invited to Capitol Hill. During the session, a senator asked Mark, "Do you really believe your dog understood what he was doing when he disobeyed that order?" Mark didn't even hesitate. "I don't believe it, sir. I know it. Max didn't disobey me. He saved me." He turned to Max. "He made a choice, and that choice saved a life. Isn't that the very definition of a hero?" That quote made headlines, and though the committee proceedings dragged on for months, changes began. The Directive Echo program was suspended. A formal review of K9 treatment and reporting protocols was launched. Several officials were removed or reassigned. But most importantly, Max was no longer just a file number. He was now a symbol of reform. He wasn't an asset. He was family. 1 year after the hearing, the military invited Mark and Max to a new memorial dedication ceremony. This time, it wasn't for fallen soldiers. It was for military K9s, statues, names, a wall of honor, and at the center was Max's story, etched in stone. Mark stood beside him once more, this time not in grief, but in pride. "You changed everything," he whispered. Max pressed his head against Mark's leg. The crowd around them applauded. Some saluted, some simply wept. A boy in the front row clutched his own service dog close, whispering, "That dog is the bravest I've ever seen." And in that moment, surrounded by those who now knew the truth, Mark realized something that had taken him months, maybe years, to accept. Max hadn't just come back for him. He had come back for all of them, for every soldier who needed to know that loyalty, like his, could not be silenced. That truth, once uncovered, has a voice, even if it barks instead of speaks. Not all heroes wear uniforms. Some walk on four legs, love without limits, and teach us what it really means to be human. The world moved on. News cycles shifted. Politicians made speeches. Committees filed reports that no one fully read. But in one small town outside of Virginia, in a quiet little house, surrounded by trees and sun-drenched fields, a man and his dog just lived. Mark and Max didn't care about the attention anymore. They had stood on the biggest stages. They had spoken in front of thousands. They had faced fear, betrayal, even death. But now, all they wanted was peace. Max, with his graying muzzle and eyes that still shone with knowing, spent his mornings on the porch, ears twitching at the birds, tail thumping lazily when the wind carried in the smell of something familiar. Mark would often sit beside him with a coffee in hand, staring off into the distance. They didn't talk much anymore. They didn't need to, because there's a kind of bond that goes beyond words, something you feel in your bones, in your heartbeat, in the silence between heartbeats. And every now and then, as if on cue, Max would glance over at him, tilt his head, and let out the softest woof, as if to say, "You're okay. I'm here. We made it." But even as they lived this quiet life, their story continued to echo across the world. Veterans from all branches reached out, not just to Mark, but to each other. For the first time in decades, former K9 handlers formed online groups and local meetups. They shared photos, memories, names of dogs long gone, the ones they never forgot. "Because of Max," one post read, "I finally told my wife about Caesar. I never talked about him before. I just couldn't." Another comment read, "I was ashamed I cried when my K9 was taken away, but now I know that pain meant he mattered, that I mattered." Max wasn't just a hero, he was a healer. Mark started receiving letters, dozens at first, then hundreds, handwritten, digital, even drawings from children who had seen the documentary. One letter came from an 11-year-old girl named Lila. She wrote, "Dear Mr. Mark, I saw the story about Max in class. I didn't know dogs could be soldiers. I cried a little, but it was a happy cry. When I grow up, I want to help dogs like Max. Maybe be a vet or a dog lawyer, if that's a thing. Please tell Max I love him, and thank you for being his best friend. Love, Lila." Mark framed that letter. It now hung in the hallway, just outside Max's sleeping area. Because in the end, this wasn't just about war, or betrayal, or hidden files. It was about connection, about how one dog, one man, one bond had opened the world's eyes to something bigger. And yet, no matter how far they came, Mark never forgot the moment it almost ended. That night, that betrayal, that mission, the burning wreckage, the silence in his headset, the pain in his chest as he clutched Max, bleeding, broken, lifeless. The moment he thought he had lost him forever, that memory would visit him sometimes, suddenly, like a flash flood, in the middle of breakfast, in the middle of laughter, in the middle of watching Max roll in the grass. He'd be pulled right back to that split second, and then Max would bark, short, sharp, deliberate, like he knew, and maybe he did, because Max hadn't come back just to be remembered. He came back to remind us that real loyalty can't be programmed, that courage doesn't come from orders, that sometimes, to do the right thing, you have to go against everything you were trained to follow. Mark could have faded quietly into retirement, but he didn't. Instead, he partnered with a nonprofit organization that helps train and care for retired military K9s. Many of these dogs had been discarded, deemed too dangerous, too old, too unfit to be rehomed. Mark knew better. He knew that every scar held a story, that every twitch, every growl, every bark wasn't aggression. It was memory, trauma, survival. And with Max as their ambassador, the nonprofit took on a new name, Echo's Truth. The name wasn't just a nod to the program Max had been victim to. It was a statement. The truth will always echo, no matter how long it takes, no matter how deep they try to bury it. Someone will hear, and someone will answer. Mark now travels the country giving talks at schools, military bases, dog shelters, and even prisons. Max accompanies him, still strong but a little slower. His presence speaks louder than any microphone. People lean in when Max walks in. Children sit cross-legged and stare at him in awe. Veterans cry without shame, and Mark begins each talk the same way. "This is Max. He's not here to entertain you. He's here to show you what love looks like when it's fearless. Now that you've followed this journey, from the battlefield, to the betrayal, to the courtroom, to the Capitol, and finally to home, I want to ask you something. What would you do if your best friend risked everything for the truth? Would you fight for them? Would you speak up? Would you let the world forget? Max's story is not just about one dog. It's about the thousands of dogs like him, trained, deployed, abandoned, erased. It's about you, the person watching this right now, recognizing that justice isn't always loud. Sometimes it walks on paws. Sometimes it bleeds. Sometimes it breaks rules. But it always finds a way back home. So here's what you can do, starting today. Share this story. The more people who hear about Max, the more awareness we create for retired military dogs and their handlers. Post it, tag it, talk about it. Let the silence break. Support real organizations. Donate or volunteer at K9 Rescue and veteran support organizations like Mission K9 Rescue, Project K9 Hero, and of course, Echo's Truth. Honor a service dog. If you know someone who worked with a K9, ask them about it. Listen to their story. Let them know it matters. Adopt responsibly. Consider giving a home to a retired K9. They may need extra care, but what they give back is beyond measure. Speak up for animals who can't, whether it's in the courtroom or the kennel. Your voice matters. Advocate for animal rights. Push for reform in working animal programs. Follow Max's story. Subscribe, comment, share your thoughts below. We'll keep you updated on Max's journey and the impact he continues to make. And finally, hug your dog tonight, or your cat, or whatever animal has stood by you when you were at your lowest. Because in a world of noise, judgment, and fear, they offer us the one thing we can always trust: unconditional love. The kind Max gave to Mark. The kind that changed the world. The kind that lives on in every heartbeat, every bark, every brave step into the unknown. So to Max, thank you, not just for what you did, but for reminding us that sometimes it's not the loudest who speak the truth. It's the ones who never needed to speak at all.